bacterial protein was reduced whenever animals were stressed or annoyed by the hornfly presence, right? So that's a metabolic inefficiency in my eyes, where like more than 50% of the protein that reaches the small intestine comes from microbial fermentation. And if this is being reduced by these stress factors, it could be like potentially leading to economic losses, metabolic inefficiencies.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Dairy Podcast Show. Today, great opportunity to have Alex Sanchez with us from the University of New Mexico. Alex, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mark. How are you today?
Very well.
Thanks for the invitation.
Likewise. Really looking forward to having you today. Alex has become a good friend and colleague over the past few years as we've gotten to know him and his work and his collaboration at the university, working with flies. So we all are bothered by flies, whether if it's in our house or on our farms, especially on our dairies, calves, cows. And really, if we look to using data to make decisions, overall, there's not a lot of data out there. There's not a lot of experience with flies, with plenty of experience, but not a lot of really solid information of what do we do and the economic impact of these pests. So, Alex, can you give us a little bit of background of you're originally from Mexico, now studying in the U.S., and you have a lot of experience both in Mexico and the USA, but give us a little bit about your background, what you're doing now, and then we'll get into some of the details of your research, and then most importantly for our listeners, the practical applications of what do we do to get rid of these pests.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Mark. Starting with my background, I went to college down in Mexico back in 2009. I finished a college degree in veterinary sciences in Torreon, Coahuila, around 2014. After that, I had the opportunity to work for the dairy industry for a little bit over 2 years. I had the experience with a mineral company as well as directly with the dairy farm industry. I worked for a farm. I was in charge of fresh cows. I was in charge of the health department in Delicias, Chihuahua. I was helping one of the holy cows that works up in that region. And after working in that area and in that amount of time, I realized that I wanted to become a nutritionist. Like the nutritionist was the most important guy visiting like the farm on a constant basis. So I wanted to give it a shot, and I decided to pursue a graduate degree in the States. So I got the opportunity to start a nutrition degree, a ruminant nutrition degree in New Mexico State University back in 2016. I started working with cattle grazing winter wheat pasture. We used cannulated cattle to measure ruminal fermentation characteristics and animal performance. However, by those days, I was running out of funding, and I got in touch with who's my boss currently, Dr. Brandon Smythe, and he liked my profile. Back in Mexico, I was working over 60 hours per week. And when I started working here in my grad school, it was not as hard as working in the dairy farm. So I guess we matched. I guess we clicked, and we started working pretty comfortably, even though it was not in animal science. Like my academic degree was in ruminant nutrition. However, like to make a living, I started working in this veterinary entomology research lab where I'm currently employed. After that, I had the opportunity to finish my master's, and he offered to economical funding, even though I was still focused in ruminant nutrition. He was like, if you stay working here with me, I'll pay for your grad school. And that's where we started mixing and matching animal science ideas with vet entomology. We measured animal performance on their how do you call those? I lost the name, artificially infested animals. So in this lab, we have the capacity to rear flies, and we have screen rooms. So we have the capacity to control these fly populations whenever we want. So more or less, that's how I started.
When it comes to raising healthy animals, you need more than the right solutions. You need the right partner who brings decades of industry expertise and a global team to put that knowledge to work for the advancement of your operation. At Phibro Animal Health Corporation, we are proud to work with you as your trusted partner.
Alex, I think that's a great background, and our fate or how we have some opportunity that maybe wasn't necessarily down the path we expected or even had any experience or desire, i.e., working with flies, and now I know your passion for that area, and also a lot of the findings. You said you have these controlled rooms, so and I know we've visited a lot. We visited some of our client farms here in Torreon, and those are the practical applications of the different ways of controlling. One of just the biology of the fly and how we control the environment, obviously pesticides, different chemicals and so forth. But I think what's really interesting is your ability with these chambers to know the impact of small numbers of flies, for example, right? So maybe with that, can you tell us a little bit about, describe to the audience here, okay, you have this cow in a chamber, and you can actually apply X number of flies and then measure aversive responses and even production parameters, correct?
Exactly. Yes. It's like a 10 by 10 feet chamber. It's like 2.5 meters by 2.5 meters, more or less. So these chambers are screened. We move the flies to like cold chambers where they cannot fly anymore. So we have the capacity to count them and sex them. So this is how we measure product performance, right? In order to approve a product for commercialization, EPA has to see those numbers, and efficacy has to reach over 90%. So this is more or less how we run those trials. With my background, I started including factors like as water intake, feed intake, other kinds of behaviors. Also, we had like a lot of cannulated animals, so I started measuring digestion characteristics when these animals are influenced by the presence of these bugs, right? And I guess we jumped that, but I specialize in hornfly, stable flies, and house flies. Those are the three main fly species that we rear in our facility. And within those fly species, we have susceptible and resistant strains to permethrin. These for hornflies and for houseflies. So whenever we're experiencing resistance on the field, we have the capacity to use these two populations and use regression lines to draw more or less where and when the resistance level is taking place in these populations.
So Alex, can you give the quick fly 101 course? These different flies, some people know more about them, but of each of those species that you work with, where do they live and what do they do? And for the practical application for our dairy listeners, what do you need to worry about for those individuals?
Well, these flies are known as field flies just because they can use any kind of field to complete their developmental cycle. This includes decaying matter as well as cattle manure. That's why they're constantly affecting our cattle productions. For confined cattle, we're going to be basically facing house flies and stable flies just because they're a little bit more... they adapt to other environments. On the other hand, the hornfly requires an undisturbed manure patty to complete the life cycle. So this is going to be more prone to be found in grazing cattle. Basically, we have to be worried, right? Because they're annoying our cattle. They change our intake behaviors, their feeding behaviors. So we're going to find bunch up of the cattle. They're not going to be eating or drinking water. They want to be getting all together to avoid like exposed surfaces to these biting insects. So again, in Torreon, in La Laguna, we're spending a bunch of money trying to cool these cows down, and the effect or the secondary effect of these flies is the bunch up of those herds. So we're not gonna be able to lose that heat as quick as we're wanting to, right? Sometimes they're avoiding the feeders just because diets that include molasses usually lure a bunch of houseflies, so they're not gonna be comfortably eating. So they try to eat and get away instead of spending time at the bunker level. They just change or disturb the feeding patterns, the comfort patterns that we want for our cattle.
So, Alex, a really common finding, and was even out in South Dakota a week and a half ago visiting some farms, and you walk into a freestall environment, comfortable, either tunnel ventilated, cross vent, and there's bunching, and you talk to the owner managers. I said, yep. In the morning, cows are spread out. By afternoon, they're bunching, and it's not believed to be a heat effect, right? And maybe you can't even see these biting lick flies. There's very few, but they're obviously affecting these animals to the extent that they are showing really dramatic behavioral changes. So talk a bit about these. What are the things, the comments are, well, we can't spray our way out of it. Obviously trying to, if it's a freestall that's near an end of a barn, keeping high grasses cut down so there aren't places for these flies to then, go and hide, so to speak. But give us some of the practical applications, as we really are challenged in some cases with, clean environments, really good management, excellent air quality, and cow cooling. But then we have these pests that are causing these economic issues with our cattle.
To answer to that question, it's gonna be basically impossibly controlled to a 0 degree, right? So basically, it's using all the tools available to try to reduce those populations, right? Like you said, like managerial intervention, where we cut down grasses, bushes, green areas where they can rest. By the situation that you're explaining, you cannot see a lot of flies. How are they causing this effect? This might be caused by a stable fly. Some of these flies just feed on the animal and leave. So even though we're not observing a bunch of those flies on the animal, there's a lot of in the perimeters.
In the perimeter of the stable, yeah.
Yeah, in the nearby areas, I guess, if you can cut that. So yes, for every fly found in a stable fly found in the legs of a dairy cow, there's gonna be from 15 to 25 in the nearby areas. So we're dealing with a bunch of flies. Again, to cut down those fly populations, it's starting with cleaning of the facilities, reduce the dirty or filthy areas where they can be completing their cycle to begin with. After that, we can move on to some of the common traps, scatterbaits, parasitic wasps, and at the end, I would encourage the use of chemicals on animals. Of course, we're all trying to move and reduce the chemical usage, specifically on the animal, right? So I would encourage an integrated pest management, use all the tools that we have available before using any kind of chemical control.
Okay, excellent. So Alex, I think, most all dairy farmers have heard of integrated pest management, right, as a buzzword. But can we take a step back and can you actually, outline, where you named a few there, parasitic wasps, chemicals, baits. Okay, can you outline, each one, and then just environmental control or outside of the stable control, cutting grasses, bushes, what have you? Can you outline each one of those and just, what are the main points of integration of those, and really, your biggest hit, if you will? I think starting early in the season, right? We're probably, for those of you listening who have major infestations, we're probably too late, right? You want to start some of these before fly season, but can you outline what is included when you talk about integrated pest management?
Let's take a step back and probably start from the beginning. Like how you start an integrated pest management is by identification. Probably here in the States and North America, we don't have a bunch of flies. We're basically dealing with these kind of field flies. However, it's important to understand who's your enemy. If you understand how they complete their life cycle, how they behave, you can take a better decision when choosing the following tools. Once you know who's your enemy, I would move to like that managerial intervention, cut down grasses, clean the areas, right? What you we just discussed. And after that, I would focus on the strategic points. Uh, Sedimentation lagoons, solid separators. We can attack those highly moisture areas, highly prone for fly development, and highly odor areas with traps that can surround those areas by using other kind of attractants, pheromones, or lures to catch those flies in a physical way, right? This can include like sticky traps, funnels, no return devices, which will reduce or negate the use of chemicals if we start early on the season, right? And we'll be focused, right? Because if we're covering a huge extension of area, it's impossible to cover like a dairy farm with these devices. However, it's a nice tool for located or problematic areas.
And Alex, I've seen some really, homemade, cost-effective traps that are really just a 5-gallon, dip or chemical container cut open and some water and a fly bait in there with some attractant. Correct? Like some of these don't have to be buying some fancy commercial system. They do exist, but strategically placing these traps around a dairy or calf raising area could be a pretty cost-effective tool, but also needs to be managed, right? You need to clean them and manage them. You can't just let them sit there.
Exactly, Mark. Exactly. Those are like very good tools. Like people are always wanting to control their flies, always try to use their creativity to design these kind of traps. Like you say, probably the downfall from those is like high maintenance. We have to be cleaning those dead fly bodies, dumping them, probably spread new scatter bait, keep them moist, right? Basically, the moist is gonna be what's gonna be triggering those volatiles to attract those flies. Um, Moving on, probably we're gonna jump into one of the most popular tools, which is the biological control. There's currently two huge companies in the market, Spalding and Kunafin. I think both of them are great. Everyone's in love with those kind of products. Everyone loves the results when using those kind of control, and people's in love with those kind of uh, control options just because they're not using chemical, right? It's environmentally friendly, or that's how they market these kind of products. In the literature, there's like a low percent of parasitic action, like 25-30%. However, on the field, like even though we don't handle a lot of those numbers, like managers, owners, people's always happy to use and can say something positive about these products. So I don't know if it's a trend, they really work or what, but they're certainly making a difference in this.
Okay. And then, question that's often, one, obviously it's really important to start those programs early, correct? So you're, maintaining low larva populations and then, reproduction. But then can you comment on the use of any premise and or animal sprays when you're using these parasitic wasps? Obviously there's some concern there, but they can be used as together as part of the pest management program.
When the parasitic wasps are present, I would encourage the use of granular scatter baits, again, in concrete areas and key points. I don't like those massive releases of cypermethrin. Probably they can be used whenever we have an outbreak of flies, whenever it's too humid or we cannot control them. However, I don't see the benefit of using that on a weekly basis just because the cypermethrins are going to be inactivated within a couple hours. So the knockdown effect is going to be huge, right? Whatever it touches, it's going to be killed. However, the effect is not going to be lasting for a long period of time. So that you can use like Cyanorax, Quick Strike, Quick Bite, Agita, those kind of products that are commercially available in the States as well as in Mexico.
Okay, so that's a really good comment there, Alex. That I think maybe most people wouldn't necessarily expect. You spray a chemical, a pyrogen-based product, and you have this knockdown. So yes, okay, it works. We see dead flies, and then tomorrow we have a fly population back. So a lot of these products, as you're saying, don't have necessarily some long duration of action. It's a quick act. So you need to do everything else, or you're just going to have new flies come fly in tomorrow, right?
Exactly. And like we've discussed in some of our talks earlier this year, like there's no silver bullet. So the more tools we use, the better.
Okay. Along those lines, a question too is, I know almost I think of it as an antibiotic susceptibility test. As a veterinarian, you put bacteria in a plate and you have the little discs with an antibiotic, and does it grow or not? I know you're actually doing on a commercial basis for companies, EPA and companies making products, resistant testing. What populations of flies are resistant to certain chemicals. In that, how common is resistance? So, a dairy farm in Texas, a dairy farm in New York, Mexico, what is it? I'm sure it ranges a lot, but is there lots of resistance? Does that change through the season? Explain a little bit about resistance.
Well, resistance has been documented since the 70s and 80s for pyrethroids and organophosphates, basically because we're relying on those two chemicals for the control of basically all the ectoparasites, right? Whenever a product is not working, like the common response from the producer is that this product's not working anymore. However, there's a couple possible options, right? The first one is that the company didn't formulate or the product didn't made it through quality assurance, which is pretty rare because those factories are highly technified nowadays. So that leaves us with two options. The first one could be misapplication, underdosing. Basically, these products are used or applied on a weight or are going to be dosed by weight, right? So we could probably be underdosing. That's some of the problems that we find. The last one, and we focus on that one in our lab, is resistance. We've been finding resistance in all the Southwest, where we currently collaborate with producers and other universities, right? The way we assess this resistance is using filter paper bioassays, using serial dilutions. We start basically from lower to higher concentrations, and we basically can draw a line where these flies dying at which concentration. And to answer to your question, yes, we're finding resistance on the field. To what degree? Like, it's hard to say what percentages of New Mexico or Arizona or California are being affected, right? Because not all of the producers are like detecting these kind of problems. They just use more product or they just reapply on a more constant basis. However, this resistance, it's happening. It's hard to quantify. It's hard to measure, but it's there. That makes sense.
So I didn't mean to take a detour. Do we? I guess so. Environmental control, parasitic, wasp or biologic control. Obviously, we have the baits, chemicals, application of chemicals, insect growth regulators. I guess that would be another one.
I guess those are described as feed additives. It could be IGRs. It's also like an oral organophosphate product. The most common IGRs are methoprim, diflubenzuron, and oral organophosphate. It's a Bayer brand. Raven is the name. So basically, these products are magnificent. Their work, I have worked a bunch with these kind of products. Whatever it's inoculated with fly eggs, it's not capable of growing under those conditions. Methoprim is a juvenile hormone inhibitor, so it's not allowing these juvenile phases to be completed. The methoprim works as a chitin inhibitor, so the pupae shell, it's gonna be disrupted, it's gonna be destroyed. So these flies are not gonna be viable. There's some evidence as well that some of these flies have the capacity to emerge or hatch. However, they're not fully functional. So we're gonna be reducing those populations with the use of this product, and of course the use of an organophosphate. It's gonna be killing all what's touching them, right? This product's gonna be impairing the continuation of the life cycle of these flies. But yeah, they're great tools. They're also described as chemical tools, probably instead of topical or on the premise side, they're gonna be ingested or oral. They're really popular nowadays, and sometimes they ask me if I can use these and get rid of other type of control. Again, no, it's not a silver bullet. Here we're targeting the immatures. We need the scatter baits, we need the parasitic wasp, we need all the other tools to try to reduce those populations. I usually try to give this example, like flight control is like a vaccine. If the challenge is bigger than the immunity that you're providing, it's gonna be overwhelmed. The system's gonna be overwhelmed, right?
I think that's a really great example, Alex. I mean, so many times in veterinary practice, I've used that example. This vaccine didn't work. We still have cases of pneumonia, what have you. Well, we all know really well from our experiences, especially unfortunately from the COVID pandemic, right? A vaccine is not 100%. And I really like your approach of that, there's no silver bullet, right? You really have to use integrated pest management, because one product, one strategy is not going to solve your issues. And I think that's a really important point for the audience here. So now let's go a bit to the economics. I know, you are, as you said, with these chambers, you can measure water intake, dry matter intake, outcomes that have economic impact. So maybe you can look at adverse activity, which we think is bad, right? But we don't really know how bad that is on a cow. So can you tell us a little bit about your economic modeling and what you've done in that area?
Well, we found in our lab back in the 80s, decrements of intake from 50 to 100 grams on a daily basis, which seems not very significant, but when you multiply that by a huge herd, by all the days that they're on feed, this can add up. That's as beef cattle, right? For dairy cattle, there's like a review from 2012 from Dr. Taylor and others. They summarize 5 or 6 of the most notorious papers, including stable flies and dairy cattle. They concluded that these economic losses were in around 140 kilograms of milk per year. So that's basically 1% of the milk yield reduced by fly presence. This is specific to stable flies in dairy operations. Let's remember that I work with several flies, and the one that I'm more used to, it's the horn flies. We specialize in grazing cattle, right? And there's evidence that grazing cattle reduce their intake, or their average, not their intake, more their average daily gains in from 200 grams to 900 grams on a daily basis, right? This can end up the season with calves that are 16, 19 kilograms lighter at the end of the season. So I can't remember, but 2018 or 19, there's this research published, and the return of investment was 8-1 or something like that. Of course, they were using current price products and cattle value, market value, right? But it's a good tool to control for flies. Moreover, we're getting the pressure of the common citizen, people that are not related to the ag industry, so they want to see overall cleanness and animal comfort. So this is where we jump in, not just productivity, but also animal welfare. Answer, I just started talking a lot.
No, that's great, Alex. And I guess from that standpoint, you mentioned the public, the consumer, obviously, lots of pressure in terms of like obviously sustainability, greenhouse gases, in some areas, antimicrobial stewardship, reducing the use of antibiotics. I guess I haven't, but are we really hearing all too much about pesticide chemical use on the dairy or livestock side? Obviously, pesticides, chemicals, herbicides, on the food side, vegetables, crop production. I guess, where do you see that maybe going in the future? Because, and maybe you are, hearing more of that from the general public or the consumer, but I guess that's something that maybe has been a little lower on the radar, I think. I'm not sure.
Well, it's a hot topic right now. Everyone's concerned about that. What I can assure you is that there's a bunch of products that work on the shelves because they're not safe for the human consumption. So even though we're assessing for efficacy and product longevity, if it's not safe for the human consumption, it's not going to be released for commercialization. So sometimes people neglect or forget all the research that we're doing behind the scenes to ensure that we're providing high quality protein at a decent price while maintaining safety for us humans, right?
No, I think it's a really good point, because I have visited some countries in my career with, perhaps we'll just say, maybe less stringent regulations on certain chemicals. And I have been impressed with the fly control, but often I've questioned or commented on the cost of that fly control from the people applying it and or the cattle side, right? I'm not sure I want to spend much time in those barns. Sure, they're free of flies, but are those products that should be applied legally? So I think that's a great point, and you're correct. I think countries like U.S., Mexico, Europe, many other countries, there's lots of regulation in place of what can be used or what can be used as there's export markets, right? So, you need to maintain these standards for export markets also.
Yes. What and when? Like, of course, we focus on product performance, right? But we collaborate with several state laboratories in the United States where we slaughter our animals after they finish their trials here, and they collect liver, eyes, like viscera, for further analysis. So we're making sure those products are working not only for the producer, right, but for the consumer.
Okay, so in your research, actually, then where you're applying some of these chemicals, you're actually collaborating with looking at some of the residues of those compounds, actually.
Exactly. Sometimes we don't have access, but we know for sure that those kind of products are never gonna reach the commercial area if they're not safe for human consumption. Also, and as a side note, like all the animals that we test new products with, they never reach back the food chain. So we're trying to work on the safest manner, I guess, for human purposes, right? We're a bunch of people, and we have to keep us well fed and healthy.
Well, that's great to hear. I mean, there are products that can do a better job, but it's and you're working with some of those, but that's what you are doing with your colleagues in the entomology lab, is making sure those products are safe to the human and the cow, the livestock that it's being applied to. So
I don't know if we can make this as a side note, and I know you can cut it down. Like when you ask some of my research findings at the lab level, I was not able to tease out like intake differences. However, the stress of the hornflies reduced bacterial protein whenever they were annoyed by the presence of hornflies. I don't know if you can add that, which is basically.
So what was that now? You said that the what was the effect?
Bacterial protein was reduced whenever animals were stressed or annoyed by the hornfly presence, right? So that's a metabolic inefficiency in my eyes, where like more than 50% of the protein that reaches the small intestine comes from microbial fermentation. And if this is being reduced by these stress factors, it could be like potentially leading to economic losses, metabolic inefficiencies, and all those kind of.
Okay, so that's great. So, or great information, not great, but great information. So, as you mentioned, you have ruminally cannulated animals. So you're in your lab, you're demonstrating reduction in digestibility of feed products due to fly infestation.
More or less, yes. I think total tract digestion was not disturbed. What we find disturbed was a trend or a reduction in microbial protein reaching the small intestine. We had these animals were ruminally and duodenally cannulated, so we were able to track what's going on from the mouth to the rumen, from the rumen to the small intestine, and from the small intestine to the fecal matter, right? So that's where we find like the most value, right? Protein is the most expensive ingredient you usually use in our diets. So if we're finding these kind of inefficiencies at the lab level, I don't want to imagine what can potentially happen when these cows are challenged by weather, high production conditions, and all those.
Okay. No, that's really interesting, right? Because those are some, I think, the real cruel relationships that we often find when we do a research trial that we wouldn't necessarily expect, right? Like, how do you explain changes in digestibility in the intestine or absorption based on flies? We don't necessarily have to explain it or know, but I think that's some really interesting information, right? We're always surprised by cause and effect relationships. So that's some really, really interesting data, certainly.
I wish we could tease out this like effects of the horn of the flies on our cattle productions, but as scientist and in one of my article's conclusions, we usually control for so many factors that probably we're like removing all those stress factors in order to highlight what the fly is doing to our animal. So instead of stressing more the animal, we're reducing or removing all those stressors. So it's hard to find those stress factors at the lab level. As we say, horn flies are gonna be the drop that is spilling the glass, right? This this kind of stressed by weather, by high yields, by like I don't know, bunk competition, probably dirty water, like not a good pen, and on top of that, they're gonna be bothered or bugged by a field fly. That's whenever I think they're gonna have their most detrimental like effects.
Okay. Well, no, that's a really important point. I know now and again you'll hear someone say, "Well, we need to push the cows more to make more milk. We need to push the cows more milk." And I always say we don't push cows to make more milk. We release them from the stressors that don't allow them to reach high milk production, right? So I think think again, heat stress, flies, not having feed, all those potential stressors, and therefore it makes sense, right? And on the economic side, we maybe don't need to explain academically how it actually negatively affects. It does. We need to prevent it and keep cows comfortable. So
it's time for our famous 3. Typical fresh cow incidence of clinical hypocalcemia is 3 to 6%, while subclinical hypocalcemia affects 50% or more mature cows. Based on cutting-edge research, Exelite offers a new approach that is build effective and the ZDUs. For more information, visit www.protecta.com.
So Alex, I really appreciate your time this afternoon, especially I know you're super busy with your research projects and so forth, and then working with producers on their practical needs. I guess as we wrap up here, the Dairy Podcast Show is come to be known for a few of those parting questions for our speakers. So I guess one was, in your animal science and veterinary background, what is a resource that you use, routinely, and that can be a publication, website, what have you, or even a mentor. But what's one of the resources that you recommend to the listeners here as you reach out to continue your education in dairy?
That's a hard one, Mark. I would probably keep in touch with the professionals like your team. I like how you guys communicate and are helping, like the Mexican society, spreading the word, assessing and consulting for Mexican producers. Just stay in touch with the pros. And I also like that you let people that specialize in such a small area share their 2 cents. I don't know if I explained myself.
No, I think that's a great. I just got back from the ADSA Dairy Science conference in Ottawa last week, and made it to plenty of talks and presentations, but didn't make it to a bunch of them. Why? Because you're in the hallway in the talking with folks, or you stay late for lunch because you're talking with folks. So I think networking, right? Just that's the resource of just meeting with people, catching up with old friends and colleagues, and what's going on, what are people thinking, and professionally challenging each other, right? So I think that's really cool. I'll say
you hit just the nail. Like I just described when I was mentioning my background. I always wanted to be like a nutritionist, a consultant, and my life just took another pathway. But however, having this relationship with you and your team like makes me happy, makes me feel that I'm part of the industry, even though I work for a university. Like I share my 2 cents of knowledge.
Yeah, especially in an area that doesn't have a lot of, again, you and your colleagues, are one of the few that are really doing this type of work. So I think that's really cool, right? There's lots of universities doing nutrition work and health work and so forth, but this is certainly really unique. When you're not connected and working, and anything recently, a podcast or documentary movie or something that has hit you that you want to share with the audience. Hey, this is something for self improvement, self learning, or anything come to your mind. I know you recently came back from a little trip to Mazatlan, the beach. Did you pick up a book or anything, or did you just disconnect completely?
I guess just relaxing and enjoying your family. I guess I love my job just because I live in the States. However, my hometown is 3 hours away. So I try to fulfill my own desires and dreams, but I don't get away from my family.
That's great. That's great, Alex. And I guess one parting word. So, what, in your experience, you work with producers, both beef and dairy, but what sets aside or sets apart that progressive producer that really, that stands out that you work with?
I believe the people or the teams that want to do or take pride and pay attention to the small details. I wanted to conclude this podcast saying that like health, nutrition, and all these technologies that we've been using like BST, monensin, growth promoters, the newest products have or were released in the market more than 20, 30 years ago. So nowadays we have to pay attention to these little strategies like fly control to increase those milk yields, those gain weights. So I would say that the most successful producers are the ones that never neglect or never diminish the potential effect that a single fly can have. Pay attention to the little details.
Wow, that's great. That's great. And I would agree too. I think it's the whole culture, right? And when you step on any operation, whether that's dairy, beef, calf range, you can kind of tell right off the attention to the detail. So certainly appreciate that. Yeah. Great. Well, again, for all of you listening, thanks for joining the Dairy Podcast Show. We look forward to connecting again soon, and you have a great lineup of other folks to record a podcast and share the information with you. As always, this is a great pleasure for me to meet new people and then connect with folks like Alex, who we've worked with in the past and know well. So thanks again, Alex Sanchez, for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks to your team for the invitation.